Another edition of Beat the Closing Number presented by TheLines.com. I'm Eli Hershkovich, joined by Matthew Winick. You can follow him on X at Matthew Winick, previewing the Final Four. So, Florida, Auburn, and Duke, Houston breaking down spread and total for both games, along with some potential player prop bets. So, Matt, as we head into the final weekend of the college basketball season, two of the final three games, where's your head at? At least on the surface.
Well, the first place my head is at is it's not the college basketball crown, and that makes me so happy because I don't want to think about it ever again. That's funny because there's a college basketball crown the day of the early afternoon before the Final Four games, and I hope I hope we boycott the college basketball crown. That's all I have to say on that.
That's why I love podcasts, is because you never know what answer you're going to get, and that was awesome.
I need to
appreciate
get it off my chest. It's been bothering me all week.
I don't blame you there, but
Yeah.
let's get into the more important game on Saturday,
Yes.
at least the first of two, in San Antonio, Florida, Auburn. Gators holding steady as a 2.5-point favorite here, total of 159.5 at BetMGM. Best money line price you're going to find is around Florida minus 145, minus 150. We've seen this total dip with Broom status, or despite Broom status getting clearer and clearer, practicing on Thursday, seemingly a full go. He says he's 100% with that shoulder injury that he exited, or why he exited the game against Michigan State. Could be coach speak, who knows at this point, but either way, practicing in full is definitely a positive sign. So if we look at the point spread here, Matt, I have a couple different angles for this game, especially with my hedging strategy, with my preseason Auburn futures, but where are you looking spread or money line wise for this game if you're betting in either one at all?
Yeah, look, I'm one of the most analytic, schematic guys when it comes to looking at games, and that's typically where I'm going to start my argument. But when it comes to this game, my first argument is one of these teams has been playing way better than the other one of these teams consistently for the last month plus. Auburn was the best team in basketball in November, December, and January, and that just has not been the case since. Florida's been better. Florida beat them at Auburn without Elijah Martin, and you're going to hear that a million times, but it did happen. There's a reason why you're hearing it. And we'll get into all of the schematics and why this isn't a great matchup for Auburn, but they just haven't been playing as well, and Florida has. This is the crux of the argument, which kind of pains me, but that's the first thing I bank on.
See, I kind of disagree from a couple different. No, that's what makes the podcast fun.
Yeah.
I thought Florida got outplayed and outcoached in two of their NCAA tournament games. Wouldn't you agree that McCaslin outcoached Golden without?
Because he's a better coach.
Right, I'm with you. Without two front end misses on those free throws down the stretch for Texas Tech, we're talking about an Auburn-Texas Tech Final Four, and then you go back to the round of 32, and to me, Hurley outcoached Golden again.
He's a better coach.
Right.
Golden happened to run into two of the 5 to 10 best coaches in the country. No offense to modern day Izzo and Dusty May, and if we're just going by KenPom in general, Michigan and Michigan State overall ranking of 28. Maryland, Texas Tech overall ranking of 19. Florida played, and then you're going earlier with UConn, 3 straight games in a row. Florida has had the toughest path of the 4 teams that are in the Final Four now, pretty easily.
And I get your coaching argument that, okay, in this matchup, I'm assuming you would favor Golden over Pearl. I don't know if I would go that far, but neither here nor there, I guess, or at least agree to disagree in that sense of the conversation. But before we get into schematics with the point spread, I'm curious your take on this, because this is another reason why I like Auburn. Auburn closed, and you mentioned it, no Elijah Martin in the first matchup, but they closed as 11-point favorites. If you want to call that line where it opened, 9.5, with Martin expected to play or seemingly going to play, this is an adjustment of about 11 points. If you take that initial opening line when these two teams were going at each other the first time or the only time this season in the beginning of February. So you're talking about...
you subtract 3 for home, right?
Correct.
So 8.
8. An 8-point adjustment, if obviously, like you said, subtracting home court advantage, that's a pretty stark differential to me. And all of the points that you said from the get-go, Auburn is not playing its best basketball. To me, Florida isn't either. And again, we talk about the coaching matchup. We're on the opposite ends of that one, and we'll get into our reasons why. But I just think the adjustment is also too big.
Yeah, I get where you're coming from, and at the same time, going into that game for context, like Auburn was the number one team in KenPom. They were 21-1, and their only loss was at Duke by 6. So there's a reason why this has changed so much. It's not like, oh, well, Auburn had a fluke loss and like they've still been running the board in their other games. Like they lost at A&M by double digits, at home to Bama, the conference tournament game where they were playing from behind the entire second half against Tennessee. They were basically even at halftime against Creighton. Same with Michigan. Michigan State played one of their worst games in a couple of months against Auburn, and even still that ended up closing with the spread of 6. Yes, the difference is huge, but it's because Auburn hasn't been playing like the team that they were when they were 21-1 and number one in KenPom.
Again, with the last 3 losses for Auburn, you go back to the Texas A&M game. I thought that was no Denver Jones. We have to account for that.
Yeah.
Best defender, one of the best defenders in college basketball. Yeah. Terrible spot, nothing to play for Auburn.
Yes.
We're in agreement there. Rematch against Alabama. Yes, it's senior night, but Alabama was coming off the Florida loss at home on their senior night. And then SEC tournament after Auburn won it the year before. And again, it's a difference of opinion where maybe there is a gray area, or there's a pretty clear-cut gray area within this conversation. But I don't know if Auburn was necessarily going for that SEC title. And you read between the lines of what Bruce Pearl had to say going into the SEC tournament. He kind of made that point somewhat clear. So, yeah, you could say Auburn isn't playing its best basketball. I would argue after the first half against Creighton, where the Blue Jays had their fair share of positive variance, going 9-14 from 3 over the first 20 minutes. Auburn turned it on in the second half. Didn't play well necessarily against Michigan, but those final 11 minutes, they look like one of, if not the best team in college basketball. And then they dominated from the tip against Michigan State and, mind you, played pretty well on the glass, where entering that one, Michigan State supposedly could have generated their fair share of second chance opportunities, because that's one of Auburn's biggest deficiencies, is allowing offensive rebounds. So, again, we could counter each other's arguments all day long. I guess my take on it, just long story short, the latter part of the regular season didn't matter a whole lot to me, and I don't think it mattered a whole lot to Auburn.
That makes sense. Do you want to get into schematics now, a little bit about the matchup?
Let's do it.
All right. I would start with this. Both defenses, I mean, keep in mind, Todd Golden is sort of a disciple of Bruce Pearl. He was an assistant under him. They did work together. Their defensive scheme is very similar to where they're going to deny catch and shoot threes at any possible, like at super high rates. You're not going to just be able to drive, kick, pass, get open threes. It's not happening. And then they both have unbelievable rim protectors. You cannot score at the rim. They'll let you get to the rim because they believe that their rim protection is going to stop you. And for the most part, that's been the case. So what that really means is you're going to need a lot of guard dribble creation. And obviously Auburn has good guards, and Baker Mazar and Pettiford in particular, who can create off the dribble. But they're a 74th percentile in terms of efficiency dribble scoring offense. Versus Florida with Walter Clayton, who's obviously a superstar and probably the breakout player of the tournament. They're a 97th percentile dribble creation jumper team. So between him and Martin and Will Richard and Denzel Aberdeen, and then even some of the bigs and what they can do off the bounce, the way that both these defenses have similar schemes, I think that in terms of scoring off the bounce, which is what these teams want you to do, Florida is better at doing that.
Yeah, no, that's a fair point. And you also, if you're betting on Auburn, I'll get to my wager or potential hedge in a little bit, but is Chad Baker Mazara going to shoot a bunch of dumb shots for Auburn? Because going back to the Michigan State game, he took 3 2 or 3 threes, and even going back to the Michigan game where it was like halfway through the shot clock. Just bizarre shot selection. Then again, that's what he's been doing all season long. I get your point about dribble penetration, dribble creation for Florida's offense. You also look at Florida defensively, and they rank in the 36th percentile on synergy or when they're guarding off-ball action, which isn't, I would say, is half of flex offense. Obviously, maybe if you want to get into the nitty-gritty with Auburn's action, a lot of it, maybe more than 50% of it, is cuts, which Florida defends pretty well. But still, some of that is off-ball action, and therefore what maybe they can exploit within Florida's defense. So that stood out to me. And then when you think about the two key areas for me where this game is going to boil down to, forcing turnovers just within the half court, which team controls the tempo, and generating second chance opportunities, because both of these teams are a little bit vulnerable against the opposition in terms of limiting second chance shots. So I actually would take Auburn in that sense, especially with Broome around 100%. At least those are the reports. That's what it seems like we're going to get with watching a little bit of his practice on Thursday. So you look at post-up defense, too, for Florida, below the Division I average on a points per possession basis per synergy. Broome can take advantage of them there. So schematically, maybe it favors Florida. But when I look at the three key areas where this game is, to me, going to boil down to, I favor Auburn in at least those respective categories.
Yeah, and look, to your point, it is worth mentioning that despite Florida beating Auburn in that first matchup, Auburn did win the shot volume. They took more free throws and they took more field goals by 6. So it is sort of speaking to that point. Both teams do allow offensive rebounds, and they both allow a lot of free throws, because the free throws are largely because they'll let you get to the rim. And even though you're an amazing rim defending team, that's still going to lead to a higher foul rate. Just look at what UConn did. It's very similar to UConn's defensive scheme. But what it also means is they're going to try to go out and transition and run if they can. That leaves you more susceptible to those offensive rebounds. I think that one of the reasons why Auburn did such a good job with Michigan State's rebounding is because they didn't run. They were like, we would rather just make this a half-court game, and they did. It was a 67-possession game, and they weren't looking to run in transition. They kept everyone back to focus on the glass, and I'm assuming with Florida here, they're going to do something similar. Game 1 was 74 possessions, which I don't think this gets near this go round, because I think both teams are really going to focus on the defensive glass. So I'm also thinking about how that affects the pace, and I think it'll be slower than expected.
Yeah, no, I'm with you there, and that correlates with the under movement so far, with this total dipping a full 2 points from the open, at least as we record here on Thursday, April 3rd. And yeah, that stylistically, Auburn is going to try to play at a slower pace. I have that down in my write-up over at thelines.com. And Florida, like you said, is going to theoretically play at a slower tempo than they play at. On paper, they play at a faster tempo than Auburn does. So if this game is a little mucky, that favors Auburn, no?
Well, if a game is mucky, then to me it favors the best player with the ball in their hands. And to me, the best player with the ball in their hands is Walter Clayton. And I like Auburn's guards, but I think that Florida has a significant of enough advantage in that regard that if this game slows down and it comes down to guard play, that's definitely point Florida in my mind.
Okay. I guess another agree to disagree point within the handicap of this matchup. To me, again, tempo, if it does indeed play out that way where it's a slower paced game, I side with Auburn. And then with Walter Clayton Jr. actually gearing to the points props, or to player props and scoring props for Clayton specifically, I haven't played it yet, and I'm assuming you're going to disagree with this one as well. But, to preface, I bet against Mark Sears last year in the Final Four against UConn. He went over his points prop. It didn't necessarily matter that UConn had one of the best on-ball defenders, because, as we know, you could talk about isolation defense all you want, but like you hit on with Florida's shot creation. You're going to get ball screens. Clayton's going to be able to free up from time to time where Denver Jones isn't in his face. However, shooting backdrop for both teams, I'm curious how that impacts Clayton. And we have seen Clayton struggle at least in one of the tournament games against Maryland. And the Terps had Ronnie Rice, Selton Miguel, two pretty solid on-ball defenders, and not nearly as stout as Denver Jones for that matter. So points prop at 20.5 at BetMGM for Clayton. I'm going to wait to see how high, or if this number does increase, if the VIG gets any better for me to bet the under. I'm not playing this till closer to tip, but I do have a slight edge, a potential bet on Clayton going under 20.5. Any thoughts there? Even though you said whoever has the better shot creator in a slower tempo game, it favors X team. Does that mean you would go over or under for Clayton, or stay away even if you're not betting it, just handicapping it?
Yeah, I would probably stay away from the Clayton total because, look, although we're agreeing to disagree on a fair amount, what I do agree with is Denver Jones is a fantastic point of attack defender. And that's going to be a problem for Clayton. Obviously, he's kind of, some of the shots he's been making in this tournament, it doesn't matter who your point of attack defender is. It also depends if Florida's able to sort of get Auburn into scrambling situations, which Auburn ideally doesn't want to get into, and that sort of is against their scheme. But in such a case where that is true, off of offensive rebounds, off of scrambling situations, that's where Clayton really burns you, and that's probably another reason why I'd stay away there. When we're talking about props, though, I think there's a lot more value to be had on the Auburn side, whether just because I feel pretty confident that Florida is going to make Janai Broome beat them and not the outside shooting and guards beat them. These teams played earlier in the season. This was Auburn's third lowest three-point attempt rate of the season. And Janai Broome took 16 twos, right? And they only had 16 assists, just about a 50% rate. Broome had almost half of those assists because Florida was letting that action run through him. Florida doubles the post at a 5th percentile rate. They're not going to double Broome. They're going to let Broome beat them and avoid assists coming from their guards in terms of dribble action. So I think Broome over points or Broome over shot attempts, depending on what's available. And then I'm also looking at under assists for Auburn guards because I don't think Florida's going to let them become creators. I think they're going to make Broome make all of the decisions here.
I actually like your Broome take. I don't know if I'm going to bet it, but just going back to the national title game last year between Purdue and UConn, we saw a similar with Zach Edey, just a similar game plan. Let Zach Edey score, don't double, don't trap the post, and we'll take our chances. And UConn blitzed them and covered the number. So Edey goes off for 37 and 10. 25 shot attempts, it didn't matter. Now, obviously, I'm hoping Auburn wins the game for multiple reasons. I'm hoping it doesn't go to a similar storyline as last year's national title game, but to a similar degree, I think we'll see Florida play it the same way.
Yeah, definitely. And it's worth mentioning that these defenses will make creators beat you off the score and not off the pass. Both these teams love to force ISOs, to force post-ups, and not allow those driving kicks, which is very different from the other of these two games.
Right, and we'll get to Houston-Duke here in a moment. So wrapping this conversation up, you're looking at potentially Broome going over his points prop. I'm trending towards an under bet on Clayton. As scary as that may sound, at under 20.5. We'll see if the number gets higher. We'll see if the VIG improves in my direction. I think it's slightly closer to minus 118 right now at BetMGM. I'm probably not going to have a bet on the side. I don't think I'm going to hedge my Auburn future, just with my inclination that schematically things may favor Florida. The part of the handicap to me that I'm leaning towards Auburn, just when you think about generating second chance opportunities, controlling the pace, to me, that favors Auburn, and then forcing turnovers. I will also take Auburn's ball pressure in that regard. So it's scary. If anyone tailed my Auburn futures going back to last April, I have around 35-40 to 1. if you want to, play it closer to the vest and take some cash in between and just bet a little bit on Florida money line or against the spread, whatever it may be, I get it. You want to play it safer, that's fine. I didn't hedge on my Clemson futures last year in the Elite Eight. I don't plan on doing so with Auburn here in this matchup. We'll see what happens depending on a title game. But either way, obviously everyone can have their own hedging strategy. For me, I prefer, considering I have this number closer to a pick or Florida -1, I have an edge in regards to the betting market with the point spread. I will stay away and not hedge on my Auburn futures. For you, spread or total wise, I know you maybe mentioned or kind of we're trending towards an under bet with the market moving down 2 points. Is that still an edge for you? And do you have enough of an edge to bet Florida here?
Yeah, with the total, the way that it's headed, I'm not looking to get into that, I don't think, unless it gets bet back up. Just because in a game with two really elite offenses and two units that can have, insane production and one that flew over when they actually played, that's not movement I'm trying to get in the way of, right? When we had this conversation last week about Duke, Alabama skying over projections in terms of the total, and then naturally it flew under because there's a certain point where when that's going against you, you have to just jump in. When it's going with you and you don't feel strong about it, then you have to stay away most likely. I'll probably go Florida -2.5. I haven't locked anything in yet. I don't really like to multiple days in advance. I just see this as we've talked about over this podcast. I don't think that these teams have really been on the same platform in the last 2 months. I think that Florida's tournament path has been a lot more challenging in my personal opinion. And then I just think that with these teams, being very familiar with the defensive schemes, Florida's just better at beating it. So I'll probably be going Florida against the spread unless that gets to a 3, which I'm hoping it does.
Yeah, interesting, to your, I guess, siding with your potential Florida bet. The market didn't budge once Broom practiced. And granted, this is a pretty large handle, just comparatively speaking to any other NCAA tournament game so far. So maybe you wouldn't expect it to, but at the same time, I was curious whether over the first 3 days we got no Broom news, essentially, even though Auburn said he was going to play, and then we actually see him on the court, and there still isn't any movement. So these next couple of days, as we record a couple of days out of the first Final Four matchup, will be fascinating. You and I are going somewhat head-to-head with my futures bet and your likely Florida bet at -2.5. So be sure to stay tuned how this market winds up moving, if at all, in regards to the point spread, or even if it gets back up and maybe Matt does play an over there. What number would you, or an under, I should say, what number would you need to get involved with the total?
It's at what right now? 158.5?
159.5.
159.5. If there was a consistent 160.5 across the board, I'm seeing a couple of those juiced to -115. If there was a consistent 160.5, I'd consider pulling the trigger.
All right, so there's our first part of our Final Four handicap, and as we shift over to the finale of the Final Four, Duke and Houston on Saturday night, and this line, similar to Florida Auburn, hasn't really budged. There's been a little bit of shift in VIG one way or the other, whether it's Duke -5 juiced or Houston +5.5 juiced, but either way, it's hanging around that territory over at BetMGM. Duke -5.5, -105, total of 136.5, a little bit of VIG toward the under. Duke money line -275, Houston +225. We have talked a lot about variance throughout the NCAA tournament, and the amount of, and you could definitely correlate it to both teams' defenses playing exceptionally well throughout the tournament. But each team, Duke and Houston, have tallied up at least a +15.1% net 3-point clip. So I start there, and as I touched on, two phenomenal defenses, but I pose the question to you, Matt, if either, or maybe it's both to you, which one undergoes the most 3-point variance in this game, negatively speaking?
It's a tough question. I think that it's probably Duke. And I know that sounds a little weird because we just Houston, when you think of Houston, you don't think of just shooting prowess. You think of their defense. And I think that in a way, it's sort of you take the hood off and they're an elite shooting basketball team. They've been an elite shooting team all season. They're number 2 in the country in 3-point percentage. But what makes it so interesting to me is they don't take a good shot diet when it comes to their 3-pointers. They are off the dribble. They are off balance. They are not they're not open catch and shoots like an efficient offense should be, and yet they're still so fantastic at it and have been all season long. And to me, that just shows me that they're an outlier in the analytic model that is what's a good 3-point shot. And that's always going to skew my opinion into a question like variance towards Houston because they've shown that this is how they get their shots despite conventional wisdom, and it's consistently worked all season long versus Duke is a little bit more of a catch and shoot team. They're a little bit more of a normal, so to speak, analytical shot diet shooting team. So to me, that means it's a little more likely that they're the ones that fall off from this sort of gap in the variance.
Yeah, if you're going back and forth in our Florida Auburn handicap, I'm with you. Even though Tennessee missed a bunch of open threes in the first half of their Elite Eight loss to Houston, watching it and looking at it statistically on the back end post game, a lot of that was predicated off of late shot clock and Houston's defense wearing them down. And then you think about Houston getting open looks theoretically on paper against Duke's drop coverage when Malawach is on the floor. So, yeah, if I had to pick one team that was either going to undergo less 3-point variance or more negative variance, it would be Duke in the sense of negative variance because, as you said, when you think about their offense schematically, it's a little bit more of the modern day offense versus maybe some advantages that Houston has in particular against Duke's drop coverage. And then on the flip side, Houston with their ultra physical, ultra aggressive defense, maybe grinding Duke's offense late in the shot clock yet again. Yeah. And then Cooper Flagg, everyone is going to be highlighting arguably the best player in college basketball. Janai Broom would have something to say about that. I don't see this game boiling down to whether Cooper Flagg goes off or not. Are we in agreement yet again there?
Yeah, for sure.
So where do you see, when we talk about schematic edges, maybe outside of potential 3-point variance one way or the other, where do you see which team having the biggest schematic edge?
Yeah, the biggest thing for me here is Houston's a heavy ball screen offense, and Duke's going to switch those screens because they feel comfortable about their big switching onto guards. But to me, the big question is Jawan Roberts, if he gets switched onto Tyrese Proctor or Sion James or Con Knipple, he's going to be a big focus of this offense because they're going to deny these 3-pointers of Houston's is what they do. Duke's going to let you beat them in the middle of the floor. And if Jawan Roberts' hook is falling, that unorthodox lefty shot that he loves to throw up that aren't technically rim attempts, which is why Houston's in the 4th percentile shooting at the rim because his hook shots don't technically count as rim attempts. If those are going in, if he's having a good game, if he can hunt those mismatches on guards and make Duke consider not switching, now you're opening up Cryer and Uzan and Sharp off of those off-dribble threes, then I think Duke has a little bit of a problem. If they're able to, look, Sion James is a strong defender. If they're able to get Flagg as the guy that's switching onto Roberts and ball screens, and that's advantage Duke. I think the way that those switches work and if Houston's able to sort of beat any of those mismatches is the biggest deal here.
Yeah, and to your point about mid-range efficiency for Houston, Cryer, 35% field goal percentage in the mid-range, 56th percentile, still above the Division I average. Uzan, 72nd percentile. Roberts, maybe not ironically, but still, as you said, more of a paint shooter with that hook shot, 77th percentile in the mid-range. Arsenault, 73rd percentile. Sharp, just because of shot volume, and maybe that also aligns with Cryer, 55th percentile, but we both know Cryer and Sharp can knock down their fair share of mid-range jumpers. So it's not just the threes that I mentioned against Duke's drop. It's also mid-range efficiency, which you hit on very well. And Houston has the advantage there. When I look at my numbers as it relates to the point spread, and we're talking about Houston edges offensively, I still can't get there with a bet on Houston because even though the market is still taxing Duke, as we touched on throughout the NCAA tournament, I make this game closer to Duke minus 6.5. So I don't have an edge one way or the other. I'm maybe going to look to bet Houston live if the number gets big enough and if Duke gets out to a bigger lead. Anything for you there on the point spread, whether it's a pre-flop bet or a live betting angle?
Yeah, I mean, look, the way that I do things, just to get inside my head, is I'm going to analyze the game entirely before I even look at a line. I don't want to know what the betting market has anything at until I've gone through this matchup in full. And sometimes that means that after I've done a matchup, I'll always try to guess what the market puts it at. And I looked at the line and I was very surprised that it was this big because Ken Pom has it at 2. And with the way that this matchup is, look, I'm as big of a Duke fan as there could be. I picked Duke to win the tournament. I put a future on Duke when the tournament started and the bracket was set, even though they were just plus 285. I bet them against the spread in every single round in this March Madness tournament so far. And I did not think that I would be against Duke here. But the way that Houston mucks up a game, the way that Houston is going to put Duke into the mud like no team has all season. Remember, this is still a really young Duke team. Cooper Flagg just turned 18. Maluach and Knipple, arguably their second and third most important players, are both freshmen. Houston is old. They are physical. They are the antithesis of an ACC team. No offense.
Well, actually, to that point,
sure.
The last time Duke played a physical opponent like this was Clemson. And that was a road game. Oh, you're not going to? Okay, fair enough.
I mean, Clemson got out-physicaled by McNeese State of the Southland.
Yeah, but they also missed a ton of threes.
And they got out-physical.
Right. Yeah, okay, fair enough. I guess to me, I'm not saying Clemson is in line with Houston on a physicality basis, but I would argue Duke's most physical matchup leading into this game, and if you look at their last loss, was in early February against Clemson. So I'm not necessarily putting them on the same level. It's just I think that Duke's their most physical test dating back to conference play was against Clemson, and that was their last loss.
You actually make an interesting point, and it's something I wanted to touch on. That Houston is the best offensive rebounding team, at least per rate, that Duke has played all season. But the number 2 was SMU, and they allowed 21 offensive rebounds. The number 3 is Arizona, who they just played, and they allowed 12 offensive rebounds. Before that was Baylor, who they played 2 games ago, and they allowed 18 offensive rebounds. And then, like when we're looking at these matchups, it's not like Duke lost the boards in every single one of those. I mean, at least the offensive boards, of course. A part of that is because their defense is so elite and their offense is so elite that teams are going to grab more misses than them because Duke doesn't miss and the opponent misses a lot. But case in point, Duke is allowing offensive rebounds to teams that crash the glass. And because Duke isn't a super heavy transition team, Houston probably won't get burned for sending 2 or 3 to the glass, unlike an opponent that might want to run against them as a counter. So I do think that the fact that the physicality, look, Duke can handle themselves. And yes, Clemson's physical, even though they got out physical by McNeese. They can handle their own, but Houston's at a level that they haven't seen. And in the physicality sort of spectrum, I think that plays a bigger role in the market is indicating.
Yeah, no, I'm with you there. I still struggle to get a bet down on Houston just based on my numbers, and I do tend to lean on them a little bit more closer to the tournament. Obviously, my numbers disagree with Kempom and Torvik power rating this game or having this line closer to, as you said, about a possession. What about coaching edges one way or the other? I'm assuming the way you're going, you would give Sampson an edge over Shire?
Well, I mean, it's tough because I think Shire's really proven a lot this year in terms of A lot of people were on the fence about him before the season, and maybe that's only changed because the talent levels increased. With Kelvin Sampson and to a way Shire, it's less about the way that they sort of prep this game schematically, and it's more to me about in-game adjustments. What happens with these scheme? How is Duke able to get out of the hard hedge of Houston's ball screen coverage? Are they prepared to swing, kick, open three? For Houston, what's their plan with the doubles? Are they going to try to get Jawan Roberts going, like I mentioned before, or are they going to try to use their guards to beat Maluach and Patrick Gongba off the bounce? The way that these teams sort of adjust from those initial sort of ways that they're going with this is the biggest factor to me. And in-game adjustments, I'm going to prefer the person with way more experience, and that's Kelvin Sampson.
Yeah, no, fair point. Player prop wise for this game, Cooper Flagg's points prop has gotten bet up a bit. Now, there is VIG toward the under for sure at minus 140. Points prop is at 19.5 at BetMGM. Cryer 16.5, a little bit of juice to the under. Knipple 14.5, about the same amount of VIG to the under as Flagg in that regard. And Sharp 13.5, Proctor 12.5, so on and so forth. Anyone stand out to you in this game? As you can maybe hear in my handicap, I'm probably going to stay away from everything pregame and wait to see how it plays out. Maybe not in terms of live betting a player prop, but at least maybe trying to get a better number on Houston in-game. But player prop-wise for you, whether you're betting it or not, anything on the board intrigue you?
To me, the most intriguing bet would be on Tyrese Proctor, either over points or over threes, just because with the way that Duke's ball screen offense works, it's not just one guy. It's not just Proctor. It's almost split completely down the middle between Knipple, Flagg, Proctor, and Sion James. So all four of them are going to take turns running that ball screen coverage. And against Houston, whoever has the ball in their hands when the screen is set is unlikely to be the one to score because they're working to get the ball out of your hands. When it comes to jump shots, which Houston allows at a 90th percentile rate, by far, Duke's most frequent jump shooter on the season in terms of rate is Tyrese Proctor. He's taken the most attempts. He also is the best in terms of making them at a 43% field goal rate and 60% effective field goal. So if we're thinking about Duke setting these screens evenly through four guys, and then somebody having to hit those shots off of the weak side pick and roll, Proctor is the best bet to be able to do that. He's also been red hot in the tournament. Now you could argue regression and variance, but
yeah,
Proctor makes the most sense as someone who will take advantage of this Houston matchup.
Right. I'm with you. That's the hard part about screaming variance with, or trying to dictate it one way or the other in regards to your bets, because Proctor is set up for a big game, but as you hinted at, he's also shooting over 64% from three in the tournament. So does that continue? I would love, and it's not going to happen, but I would love for a sports book out there to post over under one or a half, essentially, made three for Isaiah Evans. And I would bet a lot on the over. He hasn't done anything in this tournament, and he's also been limited minutes-wise, and maybe that trends into this game where Shire doesn't think he's ready or isn't fit for the physicality, as we've touched on throughout this podcast, and maybe that's what you're saying. But yeah, I think Evans is good for 1-3 in this game just based on Houston's defensive scheme, and he should get at least one or two open jumpers, even if he plays 5 minutes.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think that he's not going to be able to play much because of the physicality, but if he plays 3 minutes, he'll take 3 threes. So right. If we're playing the averages and he plays 3 minutes, takes 3 threes, then yeah, he'll probably make one. The other prop, and we touched on this earlier, is Roberts, because I think on the Duke switching scheme, Roberts has a better advantage and a better matchup on the Duke smalls than Houston's guards have on the Duke bigs.
Yeah, and if we think about positive variance or positive regression for players, Roberts hasn't done much at all over the last 2 games, and he was dealing with foul trouble in Houston's most recent game against Tennessee. So if we think about a player outperforming their expectation, or at least as it relates to the last 2 matchups, I think Roberts is a decent bet. And on that note, if we look at futures and not title features, and I do want to get to that in a moment to close up the conversation, but MOP odds,
Mm.
Big number on a guy like Jawan Roberts at 40-1 over at BetMGM if you like Houston. Now, if we look from top to bottom, Cooper Flag plus 105. Those are better odds than you're getting on Duke to win the title at minus 110. So I would argue if you like Duke to win it all, maybe Flag is a decent option. Now, I'm curious to hear your perspective on whether Flag is set up for success against the Cougars, despite the fact that we've already touched on the trap and then that leading to some open threes. Flag isn't necessarily a three-point shooter, at least if you look at his shooting splits. Walter Clayton plus 375, Janai Broom plus 700, LJ Cryer 10-1, Uzan 12-1, Knipple 20-1, Pettiford also 20-1. So any long shots like a guy in Roberts, or would you trend towards the favorites in the MOP market?
I wouldn't trend to the favorites here. Like you said, I don't think this is a great matchup for Cooper Flag. I don't think it's a situation where, well, I mean, look, these teams are all, when we're talking about one seeds, these are all fantastic teams with multiple options. I think the main point I would say, I don't know if I have a long shot for you. Roberts makes sense because he's probably, if Houston wins, he's probably the reason. I think he does draw a really awful matchup against Auburn if that's what that matchup ends up being. So there's the counter there. Um, but the one thing I would say in this conversation is I wouldn't take a favorite because I don't think the value's there.
I'm with you. A couple long shots that I had circled, and kind of goes back to the fact that I think Auburn is not only undervalued when you look at national title odds at this point, and we're obviously on the opposite end of the stick on that take when you look at their latter performances, at least end of the regular season. They're one or two games in the SEC tournament. Miles Kelly and Denver Jones at 125-1. I don't hate, and maybe you don't like the Kelly matchup just based on the way that Florida is going to make Auburn score. But if we go back to a few years ago, and this market in general is a crapshoot. I wrote this up over at thelines.com. With the UNC and Kansas title game, looking at that one in particular, Agbaji had a huge semifinal against UNC. Right. McCormick does. That. You had that. Did you have McCormick?
No, I had Agbaji.
Oh, you had Agbaji. Okay.
Oh, no, sorry. I had McCormick and Agbaji won it, and I was like, it's clearly McCormick. What are we doing?
Right. Exactly. And Agbaji doesn't do much. Voters have to vote on the award 10 minutes before the game ends.
I can't.
So, right. With the mold of Agbaji in mind, Kelly at 125-1 for a guy that could go off if you think Auburn can win it all. So it depends on what side of the teeter-totter you're on in regards to the Tigers. I think Kelly is worth a look. And then also with Denver Jones and his two-way prowess, he could also score, not just a defensive stopper. I kind of like those two numbers as couch change long shots. Any long shots on the board for you that, like, for instance, with Florida, Hauk and Condon are, Hauk is 50-1, Condon is 100-1. Scrolling down a little bit further, Sion James for Duke is 200-1 if he hits a few threes against Houston and does the dirty work in the national championship game. Anything there, or just stay away?
I would actually probably second your Miles Kelly one. It touches on a lot of things we've said so far. I mean, he took 18 shots against Florida in that first game, which was 7 more than any other guard. And if we're talking about variance, he's been awful 3 games in a row. So if there's a breakout coming, now would be the time. And then the other thing would be if Auburn does get past Florida, this is a good guard matchup, whoever they play in that next round, because of Duke's switching and because of Houston's trapping. There's going to be open threes to be had off of swing action. So I think that if Auburn wins the tournament, there's a real chance that Broom isn't the most outstanding player, and then it's just like who hits the most threes. So if you want to chuck a dart, then Kelly, who's definitely the least bashful of the shooters and is on a 3-game shooting slump, maybe he's the right choice.
Yeah. Because you look at Hauk, for instance, and after his 2 big games, like if we want to talk about trying to mine for value, and maybe he just carries it over into the Final Four, and if Florida advances into the national championship. But he was a big reason why Florida maybe not took down Maryland, but covered the number, blew them out. And then obviously a huge reason why outside of Walter Clayton Jr., Florida came back and won the game against Texas Tech. If you're looking in the line of negative variance, or maybe Condon and his role escalating a bit in the Final Four just based on health and fouls, etc., that's why I think Hauk's number is too short at this point.
Yeah, very reasonable. I mean, it makes a lot of sense. And the only thing is there, it's kind of similar to Auburn's guards, where it's like, is it a Hauk game? Is it a Condon game? Is it a guard game? There's just so many different ways that Florida could come at you that I can see why those odds are what they are.
Any last words here on either game, on the Final Four in general? We'll be back to handicap the national championship game, whatever the matchup is. But any closing thoughts for Saturday's matchups?
Well, I'm surprised we didn't break down the college basketball crown game earlier in the day. No, I don't even know who's playing. No, look, at the beginning of the tournament, I would stand on my poll and post, and we talked about this, and I said I think at least 3 number 1 seeds will make the Final Four, and we got all 4 of them. It's going to be fantastic basketball, and whether my bets hit or not, whether I make money or lose money, it's going to be a fantastic viewing experience. And I think that given the amount of flack that this tournament has gotten over the last 3 weeks, I think that we all deserve some fantastic games.
I don't know if I'm there with you in regards to my lack of sweatiness for the Auburn-Florida game, because
Okay,
I have
yes.
a potential, pretty
I
big
don't have
payout.
that crazy number future that you do. I have Duke plus 285, so we're on different platforms here.
Right. But still, we both got some action on both of these games. We gave out some player props as well to consider, and MOP odds for that matter. So really fun podcast. Remember to follow Matt Winick on X at Matthew Winick, 1N in the last name. Remember to also check out play.thelines.com for our free Final Four contest. Chance to win $100. It's free. May as well sign up over at play.thelines.com. Best bets and our betting guides are up as well over at thelines.com. And you can find our free bets in our Discord channel. It's free as well. Top right-hand corner at thelines.com. So for Matt and for myself, Eli Hershkovich, thanks for checking out this edition of Beat the Closed Number Final Four betting preview here on the Lines YouTube channel. Give it a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. So long, everybody, and good luck with your Final Four bets.